The driver didn't hesitate for even a second. He looked at the ride request, smirked, and shook his head. "Yeah, right. Chuck Norris. Nice joke." Without thinking twice, he tapped cancel. For him, it was just another fake request. Another random name in a long day of tiring rides. Nothing special. Nothing important. Just a waste of time. But what he didn't know was simple. That one tap would set off a chain of events that would completely destroy his normal life within minutes. Outside, the rain was falling harder now. The streets were glowing under streetlights, cars passing quickly, horns echoing through the city. Everyone was in a hurry, chasing money, chasing time, chasing survival. Inside his car, the driver leaned back, relaxed, and laughed to himself. "People really think they're funny using celebrity names," he muttered. "As if I don't have better things to do." He turned on the music, trying to ignore the world, and started driving away from the pickup location without a second thought. But what he didn't notice was that the system had already logged everything. Not just the cancellation, but the exact time, the exact location, and the identity attached to that request. At the same moment, just a few streets away, a man stood quietly under a dim streetlight. No umbrella, no rush, no frustration. He wasn't calling anyone. He wasn't chasing the car. He wasn't even looking angry. He was just waiting. Patient. Calm. Unbothered. That man was Chuck Norris. And even though the driver didn't know it yet, that calm silence in the rain was more powerful than anything he could imagine. Because some people don't react loudly. They don't chase. They don't argue. They simply observe. And what happens next always comes later, when it's already too late to fix anything. Back in the car, the driver checked his mirror, smiled again, and said to himself, "Another normal night." He had no idea that in just a few minutes, normal would completely disappear, and his entire world would flip in a way he would never forget. It was a cold, rainy evening, and the city was moving fast as always. Traffic lights kept changing, horns echoed through narrow streets, and every driver was chasing the same thing. Another ride, another fare, another chance to earn something before the night ended. Inside his car, the same driver was already thinking about going home early. He had done enough trips for the day, and his mood was getting worse with every small delay. Then his phone buzzed again. A new ride request appeared on the screen. He glanced at it casually at first. Pickup location: downtown roadside. Passenger name: Chuck Norris. He paused for half a second. Then he laughed out loud. "No way," he said, shaking his head. "People are really bored these days." He leaned back in his seat, tapped the steering wheel once, and looked at the name again. Chuck Norris. Seriously? Without reading further, without checking details, without thinking about consequences, he hit cancel ride. Simple. Fast. Careless. He didn't even bother to look at the pickup location properly. For him, it was just another fake request in a long list of nonsense. But at the exact same moment, the system silently marked the cancellation. Not as normal, but as priority interaction declined. The driver didn't see that part. He didn't care either. He started the car again and drove forward, completely unaware that something unusual had just been recorded in the background system. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, under a dim streetlight, a man stood still in the rain. Cars passed by him without stopping. People walked past him without noticing. But he didn't move. No frustration. No anger. No urgency. Just silence. That man was Chuck Norris. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't waving at cars. He wasn't reacting at all. He simply stood there as if time itself had slowed around him. And strangely, there was something about him that didn't feel ordinary. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just controlled. Like he already knew how everything would unfold. Tell me in the comments, would you have accepted this ride or canceled it too? And where are you watching from? Let's see who's here today. The driver kept moving through the city like nothing had happened. Traffic was slightly lighter now, and the rain had turned into a soft drizzle. Streetlights reflected on the wet road, creating a calm, almost peaceful glow. Inside the car, the driver felt satisfied with his decision. Good thing I didn't waste time on that nonsense, he said to himself. He checked his phone again, expecting the usual next ride request. Nothing unusual. Just normal bookings, normal passengers, normal night. But what he didn't realize was that somewhere in the system, his last action had already been flagged. Not by mistake, but by design. At the same time, a quiet figure still stood under the streetlight at the original pickup location. Cars continued to pass him. Some slowed down, some ignored him, some didn't even notice him at all. But he didn't move. No anger. No frustration. No second attempt. Just patience. That was Chuck Norris. And patience, in the wrong situation, is never just patience. It's observation. Back in the driver's car, the road suddenly became quieter. Fewer cars. Fewer people. The city noise faded slightly as he entered a less busy stretch of traffic. That's when it happened. A distant siren. At first, it sounded normal. Ambulance, maybe. Police far away. The driver didn't care. But within seconds, the sound got louder. Closer. Stronger. He glanced in his mirror. Blue and red lights were flashing behind him. Probably not me, he muttered. But then the siren didn't pass. It stayed. One police car pulled up directly behind him. Then another appeared in front. His car was suddenly boxed in. Traffic around him slowed. Other drivers watched. Some even turned their heads. The driver's expression changed. What the hell? The police lights reflected off his windshield, filling the car with red and blue flashes. An officer stepped out slowly from the front vehicle. Calm. Controlled. Serious. He walked toward the driver's window. Knocked once. The driver rolled it down slightly. Yes. What's going on? The officer didn't answer immediately. He looked at the driver for a moment, then said in a firm voice, "Step out of the vehicle, sir." The driver frowned. "Did I do something wrong?" The officer's response was short. "We need to ask you about a ride request you recently declined." The driver blinked. "A ride request?" He gave a small nervous laugh. "You pulled me over for that?" But the officer didn't laugh back. His face stayed serious. That's when the driver felt it. Something was off. This wasn't a routine stop. This was something else entirely. He swallowed hard, his confidence fading slightly. "It was just a joke request," he said quietly. "Some name. Chuck Norris or something." The moment he said that name, the officer's expression changed slightly. Not shocked. Not confused. But focused. Like the situation had just become real. The moment the driver mentioned the name, the atmosphere around the car changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough for everyone to feel it. The officer didn't react immediately. He simply looked at the driver for a long second, as if deciding how to respond. Then he stepped slightly closer to the window. "This isn't about a joke," the officer said in a lower, more controlled tone. The driver blinked. "Then what is it about?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the second police car behind him. One of the officers there nodded, holding a tablet-like device. A quiet confirmation. Back at the window, the officer finally spoke again. "That ride request you declined was not a regular booking." The driver gave a nervous laugh. "Come on, it's just a name. Chuck Norris. Someone is messing around." But his voice was already less confident now. The officer's expression stayed firm. It was linked to a verified transport monitoring system. When a flagged identity request is ignored, it automatically triggers a field check. The driver frowned. A field check? Over a ride? He looked around. More people were stopping now. A small crowd was forming at a distance, watching the flashing lights. The rain continued falling, but no one seemed to care anymore. The officer raised a hand slightly, signaling calm. "You are not in trouble for refusing a ride," he said. The driver exhaled slightly. "Okay, then why am I here?" The officer paused. "Because of how it was refused." That sentence hit differently. The driver didn't respond. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain hitting metal and distant engines idling. Then the officer added, "System logs show the request was declined instantly without verification, review, or safety check." The driver shrugged nervously. "So, people cancel rides all the time?" The officer nodded slowly. "Yes. Normal rides." He leaned in slightly. But this one wasn't normal. A second officer behind him stepped forward and spoke quietly. "The identity attached to that request has restricted movement clearance within the city transport network." The driver's face tightened. "Restricted movement?" He looked confused now, trying to process the words. "This is starting to sound ridiculous," he muttered. But nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. The officers stayed serious. And that silence was more powerful than any explanation. The driver's phone suddenly buzzed again. He glanced down. "Account temporarily suspended pending investigation." His eyes widened. "What?" He looked back up at the officer. "My account just got suspended. For a ride." The officer didn't react emotionally. He simply said, "This is no longer about your account." The driver swallowed hard. The rain felt heavier now. The flashing lights felt closer. And for the first time that night, he wasn't in control of the situation anymore. He slowly looked around at the blocked road, the officers, the crowd watching from a distance, and the silent tension filling the air. "Then what is it about?" he asked again, but this time, his voice was quieter. The officer straightened up. And what he said next changed everything. The driver stood there in silence, half inside his car and half outside his old reality. The flashing red and blue lights painted everything in sharp colors. His face, the wet road, the rain falling endlessly like the night had no intention of ending. He kept thinking the same thing over and over. This is just a misunderstanding. But deep down, even he wasn't fully convinced anymore. The officer didn't rush him. No shouting. No aggression. Just calm control. That calmness was what made everything feel more serious. Then the officer finally spoke again. "This isn't about a simple ride cancellation," he said. The driver swallowed. "Then explain it properly," he replied, trying to sound confident but failing slightly. The officer glanced back at the other unit. A brief nod passed between them again, like they were confirming something invisible to the driver. Then he turned back. "That request you declined was part of a monitored priority verification system used for high-security transport coordination." The driver frowned hard. "High-security transport?" He let out a short, nervous laugh. "You're telling me a ride app is connected to something like that?" The officer didn't react to the sarcasm. He simply said, "Yes." That one word hit harder than anything else so far. The driver's smile disappeared. The officer continued. "When a flagged identity appears in the system, the request is tracked. Not for control, but for verification of response handling." The driver looked confused again. "So what? I didn't pick up a ride. That's it." The officer shook his head slightly. "It's not about not picking it up." A pause. "It's about how quickly you dismissed it." The driver went quiet. The rain seemed louder now. The officer stepped slightly closer. Instant rejection without review triggers a compliance review in the system. It flags attitude, behavior patterns, and decision-making under uncertainty. The driver blinked slowly. "That's insane." But his voice didn't carry confidence anymore. Now it sounded like doubt. Behind him, the second officer checked the device again and nodded once more. The first officer continued. "The identity linked to that request is part of a restricted movement profile within certain monitored regions." The driver finally snapped a little. "Stop saying, 'restricted identity,' and just tell me what this is really about." For the first time, the officer paused. Not because he was unsure, but because he was deciding how much to reveal. Then he said it calmly. "It's about who you chose to ignore." A heavy silence followed. Even the crowd watching from a distance had gone quieter. No one was laughing anymore. No one was recording jokingly now. The driver's phone buzzed again. He looked down slowly. Final action notice. Account permanently deactivated due to compliance breach. His face went pale. No, this can't be real. He looked up immediately. You can't just end someone's account over this. The officer replied without raising his voice. We didn't. A pause. The system did. That sentence felt different. Colder. Final. The driver stepped back slightly, leaning on his car for support. His mind was racing now. Everything he thought was normal wasn't normal anymore. Every small decision he made earlier suddenly felt heavier in his memory. And then the officer added one last line before turning slightly away. This stop was not about punishment. It was about confirmation. The driver looked confused again. Confirmation of what? But the officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the distance, as if something or someone else was now relevant to the story. And somewhere far away in the city, things were already moving in a direction the driver still couldn't understand. Because the real truth hadn't fully been revealed yet. Be honest, do you think the driver is guilty or just unlucky? And what would you do in this situation? The driver stood frozen beside his car, unable to fully process what was happening anymore. The rain kept falling, but it no longer felt like part of the background. It felt heavier now, like the night itself was pressing down on him. The officers weren't aggressive. They weren't rushing. And that made everything worse. Because calm authority always feels more final than chaos. The first officer stepped slightly aside, as if clearing space for something, or someone, more important than the conversation they were having. The driver noticed it immediately. Wait, what is going on now? He asked, his voice lower than before. No answer came right away. Instead, one of the officers in the second car stepped out and spoke quietly into a radio. A short exchange followed. Too quick to fully understand. Then silence again. The first officer finally spoke. This situation has escalated beyond a roadside compliance check. The driver frowned. Escalated? How? The officer looked at him directly. Because the identity linked to that request has now been verified by the Central Coordination Unit. The driver blinked. Central, what? But before he could get an answer, his phone buzzed again in his hand. He looked down. Permanent account termination confirmed. All privileges suspended. No appeal available. His stomach dropped. This time, it didn't feel like just an app notification. It felt final. No, this is a mistake, he said quickly, looking up. This has to be a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong. The officer replied calmly. You made a decision. The driver shook his head. Over a ride? That's insane. The officer didn't argue. He simply said, every decision has context. A silence followed. The rain kept hitting the road, bouncing off the car roof in soft, uneven rhythm. The driver looked around now, noticing something he hadn't paid attention to earlier. The crowd was gone. Not completely, but most people had stepped back. Even the curiosity had turned into discomfort. Like they all sensed the tone of the situation had shifted into something serious, something official. The officer then gestured slightly toward the road ahead. The blockade slowly began to open. Not fully. Just enough to create space. The driver frowned. What is that supposed to mean? The officer answered. You are free to leave. The driver blinked. That's it. The officer nodded once. Yes. The driver hesitated. That's it. You pulled me over, suspended my account, told me all this, and now I just leave. The officer looked at him carefully. You were never under arrest. A pause. But your actions were recorded. The driver felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. So what happens now? He asked. The officer replied. Now. Nothing immediate. That word, nothing, somehow felt heavier than any punishment. The driver slowly stepped back into his car. His hands were slightly shaking now as he gripped the door. He sat inside but didn't start the engine immediately. For a moment, he just stared at the steering wheel, trying to convince himself this was over. But it didn't feel over. Not even close. Outside, The officers began returning to their vehicles. No drama. No final warning. Just quiet professionalism. And that made it feel even more serious. The driver finally started the engine. The sound broke the silence. But as he looked in his rearview mirror, he noticed something that made his chest tighten slightly. One of the officers wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking down the road, as if waiting for something else to arrive. Something that had not yet entered the scene. The driver hesitated. "What is this really about?" he whispered to himself. He slowly drove forward. The blockade opened just enough for him to pass. But as he drove away, the flashing lights behind him didn't feel like they were ending the situation. They felt like they were only the beginning of something he still didn't understand. And somewhere in the distance, the night was still moving. Quietly, deliberately, toward a truth that had not been revealed yet. The driver kept driving slowly through the wet streets. But something inside him wasn't normal anymore. The silence in the car felt different now. Heavier, deeper, like the night had left something behind that he couldn't see but could definitely feel. Every red light made him uneasy. Every reflection in his mirror reminded him of those flashing police lights. And every thought came back to one question. What just happened to me? Over a ride? He tried to laugh it off. Crazy night, he muttered. But even his own voice didn't sound convinced anymore. Behind him, the city continued as usual. Cars moving, people walking, life going on like nothing had changed. But for him, everything had changed. He checked his phone again. Still the same message. Account permanently deactivated. No appeal. No recovery. No explanation. Just silence. He threw the phone on the passenger seat in frustration. "That's ridiculous," he said out loud. But even anger wasn't strong enough to cover his confusion now. A few minutes passed. He drove without thinking, just following the road. Until something unusual happened. His fuel indicator suddenly blinked low. He frowned. "I just filled this." He slowed down near a quiet roadside station. And stopped. For the first time since the incident, everything felt completely still. No sirens. No officers. No flashing lights. Just silence. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The rain had stopped. The road was empty. The world felt strangely normal again. But that feeling didn't last long. Because as he walked toward the small station light, he noticed something. A black vehicle parked at a distance. Engine off. Windows tinted. Still. Watching. He stopped walking. "No way," he whispered. He stared at it for a few seconds. Nothing moved. No doors opened. No sound came out. Just presence. Then suddenly, the car door opened. Slowly. Calmly. A man stepped out. No guards. No noise. No urgency. Just confidence. It was Chuck Norris. The driver froze instantly. His breath caught in his throat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just silence between them. The driver couldn't even form a sentence properly. You were the ride request," he finally managed to say. Chuck Norris didn't react emotionally. No anger. No smile. No judgment. Just calm observation. He walked a few steps forward. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just steady. Then he spoke. "You thought it was a fake name." The driver swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I mean, it looked like a joke." Chuck Norris stopped walking, looked at him directly, and said something simple. "But you still made a decision." That one sentence hit harder than anything the officers had said. The driver lowered his eyes. "I didn't mean anything by it." Silence again. Then Chuck Norris turned slightly, looking toward the road the driver had come from. "Most people think decisions are small," he said calmly. "But they only feel small until consequences arrive." The driver didn't respond. Because there was nothing he could say that would make this better. The earlier confidence, the sarcasm, the attitude, it all felt far away now. Like it belonged to someone else. He finally asked quietly, "So, what happens now?" Chuck Norris looked at him for a moment. Then replied, "Nothing more." A pause. But you already learned everything you needed to. The driver frowned slightly. I don't understand. Chuck Norris turned back toward his vehicle. You don't need to understand everything. He opened the door. Then added one final line without looking back. Just remember, respect is not about recognition. It's about consistency. He stepped inside. The door closed. The engine started quietly, and the black car drove away into the night. No drama. No noise. No explanation left behind. Just silence. The driver stood there for a long time. Rainwater dripping from the station roof. Cars passing in the distance. Life continuing as if nothing had happened. But inside him, something had permanently changed. He wasn't thinking about his account anymore. Or the police. Or the system. He was thinking about one thing only. How quickly he judged someone, without knowing anything. He slowly walked back to his car and sat inside. This time, he didn't turn on music. He didn't check his phone. He just sat there in silence. And stared at the road ahead. Because some moments in life don't punish you loudly. They change you quietly. Be honest. Did the driver deserve this lesson, or was it too much? And what would you do if you were in his place?